Hello and welcome to a new video on my channel. Today I will do a tier list of all the new decks in set 5 and will rank them from S to D tier. So let's start with Hyper Agro. I personally think it's an S tier deck, not because it will win any big tournaments in the future, but because the whole meta is based on beating this Hyper Agro deck. As we can see here, it's like a pretty straightforward deck list. You play the Daisy Duck 4 times, you play the Lilo 4 times, and so on. Everything what does lore. You play the Piglet, you play Baloo, the Goat, everything up to like I think 4 ink is okay. Anything else wouldn't be aggro anymore. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward. You're just like collecting lore, trying to get some card draw with the item and with the castle, or even maybe you can add the library in, because with Channelbox Followers and Magic Broom you'll draw twice, and that's pretty straightforward. I think it's an S tier deck, and not, as I mentioned, not because it will win any big tournaments, but more because the all other decks have to beat this deck to be considered S tier. Next up we have Blue Purple. I think personally this deck is really fun to play and has some really cool combos you can play with. I would personally put it into A tier. Um, it's not the fastest deck. It's more like a fun deck, I would say. You can still play it competitive. It's really, really good. But I think it's like missing some parts to be in that S tier spot. It's a bit too slow. And basically, what you want to do is like at the end have your Mufasa out, or your Elsa, or your Hades, your big characters, and you want to bounce them. For example, here in Hades, you can just like play Hades, bounce him back to your hand, and play him next turn again. It's like a free let it go. Of course, you also play let it go, and pretty straightforward list. Against Hyper Aggro, you play the Cogsworth, so you gain your other character gain rush in this turn, and yeah, pretty good. Next deck is the repeat deck. It's Amethyst Steel. I really enjoy it. I really like to play it. I would put it into A tier. It's also not an S tier deck, but considering you can beat all the S tier decks, I would probably see it in A tier, not in B tier, more in the A tier. Here is a list of mine. I play 4 Magic Brooms, 3 Maleficents, 4 Captain Hooks, and the idea is basically to like play Pete and bounce him back to your hand and play him again. And that's how you beat like Steel Song, for example. That's how you beat all the decks that need songs in their play style. Of course, I also play Banjo to remove some items if there are like items that I need to remove. For example, the Fishbone Quill. I also play 4 Fire the Cannons, so I can remove those 1 drops that are getting shifted in the next turn. I play 4 Zeus because the list has like 10 4 drops in the list, and yeah, I play 4 Queen's Castles. I don't play the library. I'm not a big fan of it. I think Queen's Castle is still the better option in this deck. So yeah, I would put it into A tier, but it's really high up there, I would say, because you can also beat the S tier decks pretty easily. Next up, we have Green Purple, and in my opinion, this is an S tier deck. It's insane. It's really, really strong. Many decks are struggling against it. In our local tournaments, Green Purple is always the first to win, or having 401, or being 4 wins, 1 draw, or having like such a list. As you can see, you play the 2 drop Ursula, you play Lyle, which is really insane. I love Lyle. Like, I hate playing against him, but he's so strong. He has so many options. You can like give a reckless when he's played out, and whenever your characters are getting removed, banished, it doesn't matter if it's like because of 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 an action or it's getting attacked. It's you're always losing one lore, which is pretty insane. And of course, you play the 7-drop Ursula, which can be shifted on the 2 Ursula on turn 5. And if you play this card out and, for example, you play against Steel Song, your Steel Song player won't have any chance to sing any songs with his characters. You also play Clarabelle for the draw engine, and there's so many options in this deck. You can like, it's like, here I have a list of Earlmeister, but you can also play other lists that it's just a really really good deck and you can like always, of course you play still the bounce package and you have everything to go. So I would consider this an S tier deck. And yeah, next up we have Lemon Lime. I would also put this in S tier. It's really really good. You don't really have any bad matchups, I would say. It's all like 50-50, sometimes even better for you. You play a bit aggressive at the start. You get that Ursula out. You can also play the 4-shift Ursula where you have to discard a song to play her out. I think it's a really good tech card you can try out for yourself. If you don't remove the Prince John, you also gain a lot of card draw. So if the opponent doesn't remove this Prince John, you are like getting card draw with Diablo, Prince John, and basically you also play the 2 You Have Forgotten Me. You're still playing a bit. Of course, you're discarding the opponent's hand and drawing because of it. And I think it's like with the muses and with those songs, it's like considered for me as an S tier deck too. Um, yeah, think this list doesn't play Under the Sea, but I would consider playing it because it's like really really strong, especially if you have like an Ariel in your on your field or a Prince Naveen that sinks for 6. And yeah, pretty straightforward. Of course, the Ursula is also pretty good card if you have Sudden Chill or Bare Necessities in your hand. And if your opponent doesn't have any cards in your hand, if we don't talk about Bruin, you're just removing one character on his field. And that's pretty insane. So yeah, I would consider this an S tier deck. You have to like learn how to play. It's a really hard, I think it's personally a really hard deck to play. And I think it didn't get played in set 4 because Bucky was there and Bucky was just a better discard deck at that moment. But now, as Bucky's gone, you can play Lemon Lime and it's like, I think, the best discard deck you can play. Next deck is Blue Red, also S tier, in my opinion. Really, really strong. As you can see, for against those hyper aggro matchup, you play the Gaston, you play the Vitalis Sphere, you play the Ruby Chromicon, and so on. Many items. You can also play it without the items and with more actions, for example, with Be Prepared and so on. And what you can also consider is playing Gaston and I think it costs 7. I'm not sure. The big Gaston, so you can shift it on the small Gaston, which is pretty insane. I would say this list is pretty cool, but you can play it differently. You can also remove some of those items and just play for the B prep, for example. You play the Be Prepared, you play some brawls. I saw some people removing the Maui from their deck. I don't think that's a good idea because Maui is like the best answer for those locations and for those hyper aggro matchups. You can also play the small queen on 2 instead of the Gaston if you don't have the big Gaston in your list. And yeah, I think this will also be an S tier deck because it's like controlling the opponent, and especially with the Sisu, you are having no problems against hyper aggro because you're just removing one of their 2 questing characters easily away. The next deck in our list is Mufasa. Pretty straightforward. You play the Daisy deck. You also play a bit aggressive. You have the Madrigal Rapunzel, which are giving you some card draw. Um, it's pretty straightforward. Of course, Mufasa is like you have to be lucky to get a good card out of your next deck, like out of your hand. You can also like draw a Thief of Ambitions or Lantern, so I would consider even playing this deck without any songs and without any items, just to get those big characters out and to like remove the chance to not get any characters out after Mufasa gets removed. I would consider this deck as an A tier deck, but like more like an A minus because it's like still pretty luck based because of the Mufasa and yeah. Next deck in my list is blue green, um, blue cow. Some would say I played against that deck like once or twice. The really important thing in this deck is the Clarabelle shift, and with the vision of the future, really have like you will like digging through your deck to find those answers and the characters you need. Of course, you play the classic items for blue. Modern knows best under the sea, perfect answers against those hyper aggro matchups. But I would consider this deck to be more like a B, even a C tier deck, because it's like very new. You still don't know how to play with it. You still need some like practice to have it. I played against it. I went 2-0. I didn't have any problems against it. But maybe it's like just this one time. Maybe it's a really good deck. I still have to like figure it out for myself. But at the moment, I would put it in B tier. I'm still not pretty sure about that one. Next deck in the list is Ruby Amethyst. In my eyes, A tier, maybe S tier, but at the moment A tier. Ruby Amethyst, like it's always the same. It's like always in that A tier list, A tier deck, because you don't have any good or any bad matchups with it. But at the end, I think Ruby Amethyst will as always be in S tier because like this color combination has so many answers and you have like the bounce package. Now you even have like an Elsa on 5 which can exert a chosen character and you can bounce her back with all those characters. I would consider play the Cogsworth in this deck because you need that rush at the early stage of the game. Mm, I think it's also important to stay to at least play 2 castles in this deck because it's like still a really important card for you. If you play the library, I would consider also playing 4 magic brooms and 4 Box followers. Maybe remove the Cusco. And yeah, the Maleficent is also questionable, and I think you could like play a crab instead, or even play some more 1 drops or some 2 drops for this. If you play the Elsa, you can also take on the Big Elsa for 8, so you can exert the chosen characters. And yeah, as I mentioned, Ruby Amethyst is like always one of the best decks. It will always be one of the best decks because the color combination is so insane. And at the moment, I see it as an A tier, but I think later on it will go up to S tier. The next deck in the list is Blue Steel. I gotta be honest with you guys, I think it's falling down because of the hyper aggro stage we have here. Um, the problem with Blue Steel basically is that all the S tier decks are having pretty good matchups against it, and I think it will be still A tier, or yeah, it could be still A tier because you have like good chance against other decks, but I don't consider it S tier anymore. As we can see, that's like a pretty straightforward deck list here. We play the Captain Hooks for the aggro and the Smee for the aggro. We play Chicha. You could also consider playing the baby here. You play Mickey Mouse. You play the Flavasham, of course, and the Cogsworth. Yeah, I think Cusco is a really great card in Donald Duck too. Fire Decans is also pretty good tech options if you want to tech against that hyper aggro matchup. Let It Go, a whole new world, really important. Grab your sword and so on. But the thing is, if you play against hyper aggro, most of the time you will have to dig for your cards to win that matchup. Against green purple can also play pretty fast, and against blue red you have a really hard time because it's just like removing all your characters at once, especially if he plays Be Prepared and so on. And with Lemon Lime, you have the problem that all your songs and all your non non characters are getting removed from your hand if they play the Berries of Necessity or the Ursula on 4. So I would still put it in A tier because it has a pretty good matchups against those other decks, but it's like falling down. Even it could be even considered as B. I'm still not sure about it. That's why I'm putting it still into A tier. I would even put it before Mufasa, and here, of course, in the S tier, I would also say that yeah, Hyper Aggro is like one of the weaker S tier decks, but it's just like up there because people have to know how to play against it. Next deck in our list is Green Steel, also an A tier deck. I think for myself, it's like somewhere here. Here is like a cool Robin Hood Emerald Steel deck, which I think is pretty fun. You can also play without the Robin Hoods. You just, for example, play for the Morph. I think Morph is a really, really important card in this deck. I saw some people playing the Captain Hook, like the Shift Captain Hook for 5. That's also a pretty good idea. Basically, the card says that characters that cost 3 or less are not allowed to attack it. And what you do is like play out your big songs with those shift characters. You also have the Tinkerbell, you have your Morph, you can like always shift on Morph, which is pretty insane. And if you don't remove their shift cards, shift early cards, you are like you will have pretty big problems in the early stage of the game. Especially if they play a whole new world, which isn't in this list, but you could consider playing it. It's like, as I mentioned, it's like more of a Robin Hood Emerald Steel I have here, but you can remove like those Robin Hoods, for example, and put some whole new worlds in this deck and some more shift options, and you will have like, for example, what I'm also missing here is like the 2 ink Ursula, which is also pretty insane. I love that card. And yeah, pretty straightforward. I would put this deck because of the potential it still has without Bucky into A tier. And yeah, that's it. Next deck we have in our list is Steel Song. I would consider this like as one of the top decks here, maybe like this. I think it will be like one of the strongest decks and will probably maybe even win one of the big tournaments this year. Um, as you can see, we play Cinderella, Daisy Duck. It's a pretty straightforward list. We all know the cards. You can play the Gazelle. Maybe you could remove her and play the Ursula on turn 2. I think we have so many new songs in our options. Like it's insane. You can really like the only counter in this deck is like Pete, and if you're playing against Pete, that's like the only problem you will have in this deck, considering how strong and how fast it works. Basically, you're trying to get like a white board and then play whole new world and removing all the options your opponent has in their hand and like getting them new cards in the hand that are pretty random. And you are like just having everything you need to like win the game on the field on the yeah. It's pretty insane. If you don't play against those one shift characters, you will have big problems. If you don't remove them, you will have big problems. And if you let your opponent sing songs with Naveen, for example, you will also have big problems. So you really have to like remove their one drops. You have to play Pete, for example, and you have to like stop them from singing songs and from playing characters that are like getting shifted. So yeah, I would consider this as an S tier list. Still pretty strong. The only thing that could like destroy this deck is the the uninkable the uninkable number you have in your deck, because I think sometimes it's pretty high. I play like with 19 uninks, that's like really high, and you have to play around this. Last but not least, we have Jafar Wheel. I would put it into B tier. Pretty straightforward. We know this deck already. You're just trying to shift Jafar and play whole new world. And of course, we have some new cards in. We have the Pete, which is really good for the Jafar, so he doesn't get removed that quickly from other cards. For example, for Zeus or something like that, you have Grab Your Sword, you have Friends on the other side, which also gives you lore when you have Jafar exerted. You also play, I think that's a good idea, play the Archimedes and the Archimedes Shift. It's a really, really good card, I think. Still a bit underrated. I'm still testing it for my Amethyst Steel deck. And I think it's a really, really good card, especially because it has evasive and it gets like +3 challenging. And yeah, as I mentioned, Jafar Wheel, we know the combo. You play whole new world with you sing whole new world with him. Maybe you draw into another whole new world and you gain 10 lore in like one turn. 14 lore in one turn, which is insane. But the thing is, the I think the shift options aren't really that good, and I think most of the time those shift options will get removed before turn 5, before you can play Jafar. So I would consider it as a B tier deck, not because it's a bad deck, but because the combo is like pretty obvious for the opponent. So I hope you like the list. Leave some comments. I really want to know your opinion on those decks. Maybe we don't disagree. Maybe we don't agree on some ways, but leave them down in the comments. We can discuss it there and see you guys soon. Bye.